At my 28th birthday banquet, Fin Lu publicly carried his soaking wet sister out of the pool and back to her room. Everyone assumed I'd swallow my humiliation and let it slide. Instead, I trashed the entire venue and demanded a divorce. Fin Lu turned to look at me, his grin cocky and unapologetic. "You sure about this? There's no turning back once you cross me." I nodded firmly. "I know." 3 years after walking away, I went to pick up my boyfriend, a doctor, from work. Only to spot Fin Lu sitting across from my boyfriend in the consultation room, a delicate, doll-like little girl in his arms, asking about her condition. The second our eyes met, he let out a cold chuckle and pointed at me, addressing the little girl. "Weren't you asking for your mom? This is her." The hallway bustled with people coming and going. The door to the exam room had just shut behind a new patient. Fin Lu strode over to me, his long legs eating up the distance. His sharp, angular face was as cold and unyielding as I remembered it. A perfectly tailored suit hugged his golden proportioned frame like it was made for him. And the little girl in his arms, dressed in a custom-made princess dress, was utterly adorable. She clung to Fin Lu's neck, eyeing me timidly. "What's wrong? Can't even recognize your own kid?" Fin Lu's thin lips curled into a smile that never reached his icy eyes. "Then again, you never bothered to look at her all these years. How could you?" I froze, a wave of bitterness washing over me instantly. Back then, desperate to get the divorce over with as quickly as possible, I'd walked away from everything, including the baby still swaddled in her crib. Everyone called me heartless. Even my own parents thought so. The day I first brought up divorce, my mom had dragged me home, her voice sharp with disappointment. "You're already getting a divorce, why didn't you take the baby with you? She's your flesh and blood. How could you be so cruel?" When I just stared at the floor, she grew even more agitated. "Once you're divorced, your sister will marry Fin Lu before long. Are you really gonna let your own sister be your daughter's stepmother?" I curled my fingers into tight fists, my knuckles turning white with cold. So that's what she thought, this marriage had always belonged to Nova Chow. I was just a temporary placeholder. It was Nova Chow who'd been forced to break up with Fin Lu. Furious and heartbroken, she'd fled overseas and cut off all contact with the family. I never found out how they'd persuaded Fin Lu to agree to marry me in the end. For 2 years we'd maintained a polite, almost harmonious marriage. But everyone knew Fin Lu had never stopped looking for Nova Chow. The day I got Nova Chow's message was the day my due date arrived. I woke up in the middle of the night, my stomach twisting with pain. Instinctively, I reached out for Fin Lu, only to find him on the balcony on the phone. He was cooing softly to the person on the other end, his voice warm and tender in a way I'd never heard directed at me. "I'll come pick you up myself, don't worry. No one dares to say a word about you. Alright, I'm leaving right now." The second he turned around, our eyes locked. I spoke calmly despite the sharp pain in my abdomen. "My stomach hurts a bit. Can you take me to the hospital first?" He hesitated for only a split second before heading for the door again. "I'll have the driver take you." Just as he was about to walk out, I called his name again. Fin Lu's gaze on me was anything but warm. "What else?" The tightening in my belly made my voice tremble. "Fin Lu," I said, my words steady despite the fear clawing at my chest. "If you walk out that door today, we're done." Fin Lu's expression darkened instantly. "What are you throwing a tantrum about now?" "Willowshin, I'm just going to bring her home. What are you so worked up about?" He paused, then added, his tone cutting like a knife. "Don't forget, you stole this marriage from her in the first place." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water, drenching me to the bone. For 2 years of marriage, I'd never expected Fin Lu to love me. But he'd never treated me badly. For a moment, I'd even fooled myself into thinking he'd let go of Nova Chow, that he was ready to build a real life with me. Now I knew it had all been a lie. Another wave of contractions hit and I doubled over, gasping for breath. Nova Chow's cold voice crackled through Fin Lu's phone speaker. "If she doesn't want me here, I'll just buy a ticket and go back right now." Fin Lu's face tightened. He spun on his heel and strode out the door, his voice urgent. "Don't be childish. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Nova Chow, don't you dare leave." His voice faded as the door slammed shut behind him, locking all his possessiveness and affection outside. I clung to the floor-to-ceiling window, trying to ease the pain. But instead of subsiding, the ache intensified and I felt a heavy downward pressure in my belly. Then warm liquid trickled down my legs. Panicked, I dialed Fin Lu's number. The second I opened my mouth to speak, his icy voice cut through the line. "How long are you gonna keep this up?" I choked out the words, my voice shaking violently. "I'm bleeding." "The baby, that's enough," he snapped, his tone dripping with sarcasm. "I thought you were different from those other women. Turns out you're just as desperate, using such cheap tricks. We'll talk about this when I get back." With that he hung up. No hesitation. No mercy. Before we got married, my adoptive parents had said to me gently, "If you don't want to marry him, don't. We'll take care of you for the rest of our lives, no matter what." Back then, I'd naively thought that with our family's interests tied together, Fin Lu would never go this far. Later, I learned the hard way you can't expect someone who never intended to love you to keep you in his heart. That was the moment the thought of divorce first crossed my mind. 3 ambulance was the one that took me to the hospital that day. As I lay on the operating table hovering between life and death, my mind drifted to so many things. I thought about the early days of our marriage when Fin Lu and I had actually shared a few sweet moments. He'd taken me to watch the sunrise over the ocean at midnight. He'd kissed me when we were both tipsy from wine. In every dusk and every night after we'd gotten our marriage certificate, he'd made love to me like he meant it. My friends had gushed jealous. "Your husband spoils you so rotten." But those days had only lasted half a year. The day I'd realized the truth, I'd overheard him talking to his best friend. His friend had teased him, putting on such a big show of being lovey-dovey. "You're trying to make Nova jealous enough to come back, huh? Doesn't seem to be working though." Fin Lu had leaned against the balcony railing, a faint, mocking smile playing on his lips. "Then we'll just see how long she can stand it. Still, your wife's pretty perfect in every way. You really don't have the slightest crush on her." Fin Lu had taken a sip of his wine, letting out a cold, dismissive laugh. "It's just an act. Nothing more. Not worth losing my head over." The nonchalance in his eyes had haunted me every single day since then. I tried giving him the cold shoulder. He was so perceptive, he always noticed my mood swings right away, and he'd lower his pride to coax me back. And little by little I'd started to fool myself too. He couldn't let go of Nova Chow. I told myself it was just stubbornness, not love. If he could keep pretending to be good to me for the rest of our lives, I could keep playing along. Back then, I didn't understand that time isn't a healer. Reunion is. During that surgery, halfway through, the medical staff suddenly began moving around in a frenzy. As my consciousness faded, I thought of that night again. After our marriage had been finalized, Nova Chow had gone on a hunger strike in protest. She'd ended up fainting from low blood sugar. That rainy night, Fin Lu had carried her into the emergency room, running as fast as he could. His white dress shirt was soaked through with rain, but he hadn't cared. He just held her hand tightly, calling her name over and over again, "Nova, Nova." I'd followed behind him, clutching the payment slip, and watched as he'd pulled a fruit candy out of his pocket with trembling hands. He'd carefully peeled off the wrapper and fed it to her pale, parted lips. I'd stood right next to the stand, watching the back of his neck as he'd bent over her. Sweat and rain had mixed together, dripping down his skin. That same night he'd been suffering from a severe stomachache, breaking out in cold sweats. But he'd refused to leave Nova Chow's side, gritting his teeth and staying by her bed in the ER all night long. Yet here I was, dying from amniotic fluid embolism, and I couldn't even get him to answer my phone call. I'd liked him once. But loving someone this much, loving someone who makes you this small, this worthless, it's not worth it. Maybe it was divine mercy, but somehow I'd survived that brush with death. I was wheeled out of the ICU 5 days later. I still hadn't seen Fin Lu, but I heard about him from my nurse. It turned out that while I'd been fighting for my life on the operating table, he'd been throwing a welcome home party for Nova Chow. He'd even arranged a fireworks show for her. Under the dazzling, exploding fireworks, the two of them had smiled at each other, a look of quiet affection and restraint passing between them. In this marriage, I'd forgiven so many things I shouldn't have. I'd thought that by being patient, by being understanding, I could earn his love and find happiness. Later, I realized he'd already written our ending from the very beginning. No matter what I did, I was never going to be happy. So the first thing I did after leaving the hospital was ask him for a divorce. He'd been silent for a long time before speaking, his voice soft and dismissive, like he was humoring a child. "Don't be silly. Just focus on recovering. He'd thought my decision was just a result of postpartum hormones messing with my head. It wasn't until 3 months later at my birthday banquet, when I'd shouted the words in front of everyone, that he finally took me seriously. He'd been carrying a soaking wet Nova Chow to her room when I'd spoken up. When he'd turned around and heard my demand, he'd grinned that same cocky grin, like he'd been waiting for this. "You sure about this? There's no turning back once you cross me." I'd nodded, my voice calm and steady. "Yes." For Finn Piper, Nova Chow's voice pulled me back to the present. She was wearing a full face of elaborate makeup, her high heels clicking against the floor as she stopped beside Finn Lu. "What did the doctor say?" "The surgery is scheduled for next month." Nova Chow let out a relieved sigh, smiling brightly. "You have no idea how hard it was to get an appointment with Dr. Chin. Now Piper will finally get the treatment she needs." Her voice trailed off mid-sentence as if she'd just noticed me standing there. She let out a fake gasp of surprise. "Willow Shin." Before I could say anything, she went on, her tone sugary sweet and dripping with fake concern. "Did you come back because you heard Piper was sick? Well, it's only right. You are her biological mother after all." As soon as she finished speaking, Finn Lu cut in, his voice cold and sharp. "Biological mother? She doesn't deserve that title." I froze, my gaze darting to the little girl in his arms. And in her eyes, I saw a flicker of sadness and loss, a look I couldn't bear to face. In truth, Finn Lu had initially agreed to let me take the baby with me. But then he'd gone back on his word. I'd confronted him, screaming at him, demanding to know why he'd changed his mind. The man had been lounging lazily on the sofa, his long legs stretched out casually in front of him. He'd looked at me with that same cold, indifferent gaze. "Nova doesn't want to ruin her figure by having kids." I'd been so angry I could barely speak, my voice shaking with rage. "That's my daughter. She's my daughter too." He'd shrugged like it was no big deal. "Don't worry. Nova will raise her like her own." I'd refused to agree. And he'd resorted to using every dirty trick in the book to force me to back down. No matter what he said, I wouldn't give in. In the end, he'd fixed me with a frigid stare, his voice a low threat. "If you don't sign the papers, I'll make sure your adoptive parents lose everything they've worked for. Their jobs, their reputation, everything." That was the moment I'd realized I had no power to fight him. As we stood there, locked in a tense silence, Nova Chow reached out and tugged at Finn Lu's sleeve, trying to smooth things over with a forced smile. "Why don't we all get dinner together? It'll be nice to catch up, right, Finn?" Finn Lu shot me a cold glance, his eyes as thin and sharp as shards of ice. "I have no interest in catching up with my ex-wife." With that, he turned on his heel and strode away, leaving me standing there in the middle of the crowded hallway, my heart in pieces. Nova Chow chased after him for a few steps, then doubled back to me. "You didn't come back just to fight me for Piper, did you?" "No. I came back to get married." She let out a sharp, surprised gasp. "You're getting married?" I couldn't blame her for being shocked. It had been 2 years since I divorced Finn Lu, and they still hadn't gotten their marriage certificate or held a wedding. Once again I was beating her to the punch. But instead of looking annoyed, she let out a long, relieved sigh. "Congratulations. Have you set a date yet?" "The 8th day of next month." She hesitated for a moment, then asked again, "You haven't told Mom and Dad about this yet, have you? Shouldn't you ask for their opinion first?" "I'll think about it later." That very night, however, my parents called, ordering me to come home immediately. As soon as I walked in, my mom greeted me with a scowl, firing off questions without a second of hesitation. "What are you doing back here? Weren't you so high and mighty when you left, saying you'd never step foot in this house again? And who exactly are you marrying? What's his family background like? Does he even know you've been married before? That you have a kid?" 6. I used to think home was a safe harbor. But all the storms I'd weathered over the years had come straight from this very place. All parents want the best for their children except my biological parents. They're the only ones who know exactly how to twist the knife in my wounds. Even though I'd long known they never really liked me, hearing those harsh words still stung. My eyes burned and a wave of heartache washed over me, making it hard to breathe. Seeing me stay silent, Nova Chow hurried over to tug my mom's arm, but her words were directed at me. "Willow, say something. Mom's only looking out for you. If he doesn't know about your past, you really should tell him sooner rather than later." I curled my lips into a bitter, mocking smile. Don't even compare him to the likes of you. You're not even worthy. The second the words left my mouth, my parents both roared in unison. What did you just say? Say that again. At the same time, a familiar voice cut through the chaos. What's going on here? Following the sound, I saw Fin Lu standing at the staircase landing, holding Piper's hand. Nova Chow immediately went up to him, naturally taking Piper's hand from his grasp as she spoke. Fin, Willow's getting married. Fin Lu's voice was as cold and indifferent as ever. Oh. Congratulations. Nova Chow, that's exactly what I said. I'm so happy she found her true love. By the way, Willow, why didn't you bring your boyfriend home today? No need for dinner. He's swamped with work. I pulled out the wedding invitations from my bag and set them on the coffee table. These are our invitations. Come or don't, it's up to you. Also, don't bother calling me back here unless it's something important. As I turned to leave, my eyes met Piper's. My footsteps froze. Her lips moved silently as if she was whispering, Mommy. I clenched my hands into tight fists, my heart warring with itself for long, agonizing seconds. Then my face went blank and I averted my gaze, striding out of the house without a backward glance. 7 I was waiting for Orion Chin at the community gate when a car pulled up slowly beside me. The window rolled down, revealing Fin Lu's sharp, cold features. Get in. I politely declined. No thank you. My boyfriend is on his way to pick me up. He let out a low, humorless chuckle. Willow Shin, haven't you bothered to check? I frowned, confused. Check what? Bigamy is illegal. We're already divorced. Are we? His long, slender fingers tapped lazily against the steering wheel as he spoke, his tone casual and infuriating. What if I never sign the divorce papers? I stared at him in disbelief. What did you say? He avoided my question entirely. Get in. I stayed rooted to the spot, trying to keep my voice calm and steady. Why won't you sign them? Fin Lu rested one arm on the car window, looking every bit the lazy, arrogant scoundrel he was. Want to know? Then get in the car. They say some people only have 3 parts love to give, yet they put on a show of 7 parts just to make you fall for them hook, line, and sinker. Fin Lu was exactly that kind of person. Clearly we were over, yet he insisted on playing the victim. Fin Lu. I locked eyes with him, my gaze steady. Could it be that you can't let me go? A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his dark eyes, vanishing almost instantly. It was replaced by a look of pure contempt. You think you're worthy? Oh. Then why haven't you married Nova Chow yet? He gave me a half-smile, his eyes cold as ice as they landed on me. Giving up the act now? I blinked, confused. What act? Not so long ago you were asking around about when Nova and I would get married. Don't tell me that wasn't you trying to win me back. I didn't deny it. It was true, not long ago I'd been asking around about him and Nova Chow. But not for the reason he thought. I hadn't been trying to get back together with him. I'd been planning to fight for full custody of my daughter. Because not long before that, I'd received an anonymous email containing a recording of a conversation between Nova Chow and my biological mother. Nova Chow's voice filled the recording. Mom, Willow Shin's getting remarried. Why hasn't Fin proposed to me yet? Do you think he doesn't love me anymore? My mother's voice replied, soothing and conniving. Who else would he love if not you? Stop overthinking things, honey. Nova Chow, for the past 3 years, all his attention has been on that kid. He barely even has time for me. You silly girl, why don't you use your head for once? If all else fails, just give him a son. Once you do that, he'll never spare that little girl another glance. But I told him I didn't want to have kids. That was just a lie to keep Fin Lu from getting back together with Willow, wasn't it? Just do as I say, give birth to a son as soon as possible. A mother's status rises with her son. Nova Chow sounded convinced, sighing with relief. You're right, Mom. You've always been the best to me. I was so worried that once Willow Shin came back, you guys would start favoring her over me. Don't be ridiculous. There's always a difference between a child you gave birth to and one you raised yourself. The recording cut off right there. That night I lay awake until dawn broke. And finally I made up my mind. I was going to get my daughter back. Before I'd come back I'd planned everything down to the last detail. The only thing I hadn't counted on was that Finlu had never signed the divorce papers. You have 1 minute left to decide. Finlu's voice cut through my tangled thoughts. I lowered my eyes to look at him, my voice cold. What exactly do you want from me? He still refused to answer my question directly. Piper wants to go to the amusement park. I'm busy tomorrow, you take her. The word, no, was on the tip of my tongue, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. Finlu's eyes were as sharp as a fox's, he could see right through any lie I told. 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Don't let her down. 8 the next day when I arrived at the amusement park gate, Finlu and Piper were already there waiting for me. He handed Piper over to me without a second thought, glancing at his watch. I'll be back to pick her up at 5 this afternoon. With that he turned and left, his steps quick and purposeful. I held Piper in my arms as we walked toward the entrance. What do you want to play first, sweetie? Her big dark eyes looked up at me, filled with a timid wariness. I want to play bumper cars, but Daddy never lets me. Her soft, childish voice made my heart melt. I smiled down at her, my tone gentle and reassuring. You're still a little too young for bumper cars, baby. They can be dangerous and I don't want you to get hurt. How about we play something else instead? Okay. However, we'd barely taken 2 steps when someone blocked our path. It was Nova Chow. She was holding a cake in her hands, smiling brightly as she approached us. Finn told me to buy Piper's favorite cake. You guys should take it with you. I'd originally planned to refuse, but when I saw the look of pure joy light up Piper's face, I reluctantly took the cake from her. Nova Chow's smile widened, looking genuinely pleased. Then you two have fun. I'll see you later. Every single day after that, whenever I thought back to that moment, I wanted nothing more than to tear that fake smile right off Nova Chow's face. She knew full well that Piper was deathly allergic to mangoes. And yet she'd sent over a mango cake. Outside the emergency room, Finlu and Nova Chow arrived in a rush. Nova Chow immediately launched into a tirade, pointing an accusing finger at me. How could you give her a mango cake? Don't you know she's allergic to mangoes? I'd always known Nova Chow was two-faced and scheming, but I'd never imagined she'd have the audacity to turn the tables on me like this. Even more shocking, Finlu believed her. A cold, angry flush spread across his pale face as he glared at me. You gave this to her? It wasn't me. I bit my lip, my voice trembling with frustration. Nova Chow brought the cake. She said you told her to. Willow Shen. Nova Chow cut me off, her voice shrill and accusatory. I was at dance practice bright and early this morning. How could I have possibly brought you a cake? Tears welled up in her eyes as she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. I've been the one taking care of Piper all these years. How could I possibly not know she's allergic to mangoes? Even if you're desperate to steal Piper away from me, you have no right to gamble with her health like this. I wanted to say something, anything to defend myself, but the words died in my throat. As her mother, I didn't even know she was allergic to mangoes. If I had, I would never have let her take even a single bite. I tried to explain, opening my mouth to speak, only to meet Finlu's cold, icy gaze, filled with undisguised disgust. Even when he disliked me the most in our marriage, he'd never once looked at me with such revulsion. This was the first time. A sharp, searing pain stabbed at my heart, spreading through my chest like a million tiny needles. It hurt so badly I could barely breathe. The words of explanation I'd been about to say got stuck in my throat and I swallowed them back down, defeated. What was the point? What could I possibly say? That the cake had been Nova Chow's idea? Or that I was such a terrible mother, I didn't even know my own daughter's allergies? No matter how I tried to defend myself, I would always be to blame. 9 We stood there in a tense, silent standoff. Then my biological parents arrived. Without even bothering to ask what had happened, they launched into a furious barrage of insults, screaming at me at the top of their lungs. I knew you came back for no good reason. Even a tiger doesn't eat its own cubs, but you? How could you do something like this to your own flesh and blood? Are you even human? You're nothing but a wild, ungrateful country girl. We never should have brought you back to live with us. My hands at my sides clenched into tight fists, my nails digging into my palms as I stood rooted to the spot, frozen in place. I'd always known they favored Nova Chow over me. But this time they didn't even ask for my side of the story. They immediately assumed I was the one at fault. I was the one who'd been set up, the one who'd been wronged. Yet somehow I'd become the enemy they all banded together to attack. I bit down hard on my lower lip, the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth as my hands and feet turned ice cold. Just when I thought I'd drown in a sea of accusations and hatred, a man's voice cut through the chaos like a ray of sunlight breaking through dark clouds. Enough. The crisp, clean scent of a doctor's white coat filled the air as a figure strode over to me. In the next second I was pulled into a warm, familiar embrace. He wrapped his hand around mine, his fingertips burning hot against my cold skin. He quickly checked me over from head to toe, making sure I wasn't hurt before letting out a relieved sigh, though his expression remained stern and angry. Too scared to fight back now? I clutched at the front of his shirt, all the pent-up sadness, anger, and injustice I'd been holding back pouring out the second he appeared. "Piper's in the emergency room." My voice cracked, tears streaming down my face as I struggled to get the words out. "She ate the cake Nova Chow brought her. The one with mangoes." "I know." His voice was steady and calm, filled with unwavering certainty. "I've already seen the surveillance footage." Those simple words were enough to make everyone around us freeze, their faces twisting into a variety of shocked and guilty expressions. None looked more guilty than Nova Chow. But she quickly composed herself, forcing a polite, sweet smile onto her face as she addressed the man holding me. "Dr. Ching, I didn't know you and our Willow were acquainted. What a wonderful coincidence." I don't think it's fine at all." Orion Ching cut her off without mercy. "If you really saw her as family, you wouldn't have hurt her child and framed her for it." His eyes, usually so calm, almost indifferent, were now as dark and turbulent as the midnight sea. "Dr. Ching, this is a family matter." My biological father finally spoke up, his tone polite yet distant, the way one addresses a stranger. "It isn't anymore." Orion Ching interrupted him. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried an air of unshakable authority. "Since none of you have ever treated her with decency, don't bother showing up to our wedding." "What? A wedding? You two are getting married? So you're the man she's marrying?" Everyone stared at us in shock. Even Fin Lu, who'd been silent all this time, raised an eyebrow, a rare show of surprise. But no one was more stunned than Nova Chow. "How is that possible? How could you two be getting married? Do you even know she's been married before? That she has a child?" It was clear none of them had bothered to open my wedding invitation. Does having been married and having a child strip a woman of her right to happiness? Orion Ching's gaze on Nova Chow was anything but warm. Nova Chow stumbled over her words. "That's not what I meant." Orion Ching cut her off again, his words sharp and cutting. "As a woman yourself, why do you harbor so much malice toward another woman? Then again, only someone with a truly vicious heart would target an innocent child." "Dr. Ching." Fin Lu spoke up abruptly, his voice cold. "Watch your words." Orion Ching curved his lips into a faint smile, but his words were directed at Nova Chow. "If you have time to plot against a little kid, why don't you check your fiancé's marital status first?" Nova Chow frowned, confused and annoyed. "What are you talking about?" Orion Ching smiled, a hint of mischief in his eyes. "I mean, your fiancé is still legally married." The words hung in the air and the hallway fell into a deathly silence. The quiet stretched on for what felt like an eternity, until the emergency room door suddenly swung open. Orion Ching and I rushed forward without hesitation. Fin Lu moved to follow, but Nova Chow grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his skin. "Fin Lu, are you just going to ignore this? Explain yourself." "I'll explain when we get home." He wrenched his arm free of her grasp and strode into the elevator, hot on our heels. As the elevator doors slid shut, I caught a glimpse of Nova Chow's face, twisted with jealousy and rage. That day, Fin Lu barely stepped into the ward before Nova Chow caught up to him and dragged him away. No one knew what happened between them after that. But later that night Fin Lu came back. Piper's condition had stabilized and she was sleeping soundly. The tall man stood in front of me, looking down at me with that familiar, scrutinizing gaze. "You like him that much?" It was an abrupt, out-of-the-blue question, but I understood exactly what he meant. Fin Lu had actually met Orion Ching a long time ago at our wedding. When we'd gone to toast the table of my high school classmates, everyone had stood up to clink glasses with us. Everyone except Orion Ching. He hadn't even looked at me. He just kept drinking glass after glass. Fin Lu was such a perceptive man, how could he have failed to notice the tension? But he'd said nothing, shown no sign of his suspicions. Instead he dropped subtle hints here and there to let me know he was bothered. In the end I'd been the one to crack, confessing everything to him. I still remembered the faint, amused smirk that had tugged at Fin Lu's lips when he found out Orion and I had been academic partners back in high school. "You like him?" He'd stated it as a fact, not a question. And instead of getting flustered, I'd admitted it openly. Back in high school, Orion had been popular with the girls and I'd been one of them. He'd consistently ranked in the top 20 of our grade. Tall, clean-cut, he carried himself with a quiet poise and focus that set him apart from the rest of us. Orion had always had a clear sense of who he was and where he wanted to go. He'd moved through life at his own steady pace, gentle yet unyielding. That year we'd sat next to each other as desk mates. I'd learned so much from him, lessons that had stayed with me, shaping me into the person I was today. "You like him that much?" Fin Lu's voice pulled me back to the present, his tone sharp with something that sounded suspiciously like jealousy. "How does that compare to how you liked me back then?" His thin lips were pressed into a tight line, his dark eyes fixed on mine, searching for something. I met his gaze and let out a soft, cold laugh. "Compared to him? You don't even deserve to be mentioned in the same breath." The man's expression shattered instantly. "What did you say?" It was no wonder he was so shocked. All these years I'd played the role of the obedient, docile wife in front of him. Never once had I defied him, let alone spoken to him in such a dismissive tone. I'd cared too deeply, so I'd walked on eggshells around him, always thinking that if I just went along with everything he wanted I could eventually win his heart. Later I'd learned the hard truth: you can't expect someone who never intended to love you to give you the closure you deserve. "Fin Lu." I spoke calmly, my voice steady. "We need to redraft the divorce agreement. I want Piper's custody." "Absolutely not." Fin Lu refused without a second thought, his voice rising sharply. "I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to inform you. After everything that had happened, there was no way I would leave Piper in their clutches. Nova Chiao wasn't even Piper's stepmother yet, and she'd already dared to hurt the little girl. What would happen if they got married and started living under the same roof? I didn't dare to imagine the horrors that would await Piper. No matter what it cost me, I would fight tooth and nail to get full custody of my daughter." Realizing I wasn't joking, Fin Lu's expression darkened instantly, his eyes flashing with rage. "You want my daughter to call another man Dad? Do you really think life is that easy?" I frowned, my patience wearing thin. "Piper's my daughter too. Besides, Orion is a pediatric specialist, he'll be able to take better care of her than you ever could." "You're dreaming." Fin Lu enunciated each word slowly, his voice dripping with cold fury. "If that's how it's going to be, then we're not getting a divorce." "What did you say?" I stared at him in disbelief, wondering if I'd misheard. He let out a cold, humorless laugh. "You claim you can't bear to be separated from the child? Fine. Then we'll give her a complete family. No divorce. Have you lost your mind?" I was so angry my whole body was shaking, unable to believe he would say something so absurd. He stared at me deeply, his gaze intense and unreadable. "I'll come to pick you two up tomorrow afternoon. We're going home." "Fin Lu, what on earth are you trying to do?" He ignored my question, checked on Piper's sleeping form, then turned and strode out of the ward without another word. I was convinced Fin Lu had only said those things to spite me. After all, Nova Chiao was the woman he'd always wanted to marry. But it wasn't until Nova Chiao stormed into the hospital to confront me that I realized Fin Lu hadn't been speaking out of anger. "Willow Shin, what did you say to Fin Lu to make him call off our engagement?" I frowned, annoyed by her baseless accusation. "What does your broken engagement have to do with me?" Nova Chiao slammed the original divorce agreement onto the table in front of me. "You knew he never signed it, didn't you? Don't you dare play dumb with me." I glanced down at the document, my mind racing. It was true, I'd long since accepted the fact that Fin Lu and I were still legally married. So I managed to keep my voice steady and calm. I really had no idea. Fin Lu had told me he would take care of the divorce proceedings as soon as possible, and I'd believed him. Back then his world had revolved entirely around Nova Chiao. I'd never thought he'd drag his feet on something that would free him to be with her. I still didn't understand why he hadn't signed the papers after all these 2 years. I lifted my gaze to meet hers, my tone indifferent. If it's not too much trouble, could you tell him to sign the papers as soon as possible? I paused, then added pointedly. Bigamy is illegal. I'd like to get this sorted out before my wedding. Nova Chiao stared at me, clearly taken aback by my reaction. She hesitated for a moment, then asked uncertainly. You're really not here to get back together with him? No. From the moment I'd made up my mind to divorce him, I'd never once looked back. She still didn't seem convinced, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. But you want your daughter back, don't you? If he refuses to divorce you, you'll get to live with her. Isn't that what you want? Nova Chiao. I leaned forward slightly, my voice lowering. Let's make a deal. Nova Chiao fell silent, her eyes sharp as she studied me, as if trying to see straight through to my true intentions. After a long, tense moment, she finally spoke up. What kind of deal? That depends on what you're willing to do. Rest assured, once he signs the divorce papers, I'll take Piper and leave this city immediately. You'll never have to see either of us again. And why should I trust you? I smiled faintly, knowing exactly what to say to push her buttons. Because you've never wanted to be my daughter's stepmother, have you? A flicker of unease crossed her face, followed by a flash of annoyance. After a long pause, she nodded firmly. Deal. It's a promise. 11 After seeing Nova Chiao off, I checked Piper out of the hospital and took her home with me. On the drive, Piper stared at me with her big, curious eyes. By the 8th time she'd asked, Mommy, where are we going? I pulled the car over to the side of the road and turned to her, asking her the question I'd been dying to ask since we left the hospital. Piper, would you like to come live with Mommy? She tilted her head, her eyes wide with wonder. Can Piper live with Mommy? Of course you can. Will we ever have to be apart again? No. Never again. Piper's face lit up with a bright, beaming smile, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Then I want to live with Mommy forever. We'll never be separated again. I let out a long, relieved breath, then looked at her seriously. From now on, no matter who asks you, no matter what they say, you tell them you want to live with Mommy, okay? She nodded her head slowly, a look of childish confusion on her face, but she still promised. Okay, Mommy. As soon as we got home, I immediately filed for divorce online. It wasn't that I didn't trust Nova Chiao, it was that I didn't trust Fin Lu. Beneath his polished, sophisticated exterior, he was nothing more than a deranged madman capable of anything. That night, I just finished tucking Piper into bed when the doorbell rang. Peering through the peephole, I saw Fin Lu standing on my doorstep. He'd actually found my new place. With the door between us, I quickly shot Orion a text, filling him in on what was happening. He was probably in the middle of surgery because he didn't reply right away. After a moment's hesitation, I sent a text to Nova Chiao instead. Less than 2 minutes after I hit send, the sound of a phone ringing echoed from outside the door, Fin Lu's phone. He answered the call, and whatever the person on the other end said must have been urgent, because he turned and left in a hurry. I stood behind the door for a few more minutes, making sure he wasn't going to come back, before finally relaxing and heading back to my room. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone ringing. It was Orion Chin's colleague. Dr. Chin got into a fight. You need to come here right away. 12 From the day we'd met at 17 until now, the Orion Chin I knew had never been one to pick a fight with anyone. I rushed to the hospital, my mind racing as I replayed his colleague's words over and over again. He'd said that Mr. Liu showed up out of nowhere and attacked Dr. Chin without a word of warning. Dr. Chin didn't fight back at all, he just took it. Now he's in the hospital. He really did a number on him. Never mind, you'll see for yourself when you get here. I hadn't expected to see Fin Lu at the hospital too. I was about to push the door open when Fin Lu's voice drifted out first, cold and mocking. Is she really worth getting beaten up for? Orion Chin was silent for a long time before he finally spoke, his voice calm but strained. Do you know why I didn't fight back? Because this way her chances of getting full custody of Piper will be even higher. Fin Lu let out a bitter, disbelieving laugh. What is it about her that makes you willing to go to such lengths? Orion Chin didn't answer his question. Instead he asked one of his own, his tone sharp with amusement. You sent her that audio recording, didn't you? You thought if you made her jealous enough to walk out and dragged your feet on the divorce for all these years, she'd eventually come crawling back to you. Then his voice took on a distinctly taunting edge. Mr. Liu, when it comes to making up with your wife, you don't let things drag on overnight, let alone over years. Fin Lu's face turned ashen with rage, but for once he had no retort to make. 12 I'd known Orion Chin since we were 17, and in all that time, I'd never seen him pick a fight with anyone. I rushed to the hospital, replaying his colleague's words in my head the entire way there. He said that Mr. Liu showed up out of the blue and attacked him without a word. Dr. Chin didn't fight back at all, he just took it. Now he's in the hospital. He really laid into him. Never mind, you'll see for yourself when you get here. I hadn't expected to find Fin Lu at the hospital too. I was about to push the door open when Fin Lu's cold, mocking voice drifted out first. Is she really worth getting beaten up for? Orion Chin was silent for a long time before he finally spoke, his voice calm but strained. Do you know why I didn't fight back? Because this way her chances of getting full custody of Piper will be even higher. Fin Lu let out a bitter laugh of disbelief. What is it about her that makes you willing to go to such lengths? Orion Chin didn't answer his question. Instead he asked one of his own, his tone sharp with quiet amusement. You sent her that audio recording, didn't you? You thought if you made her jealous enough to walk out and dragged your feet on the divorce for all these years, she'd eventually come crawling back to you. Then his voice took on a distinctly taunting edge. Mr. Liu, when it comes to making up with your wife, you don't let things drag on overnight, let alone over years. Fin Lu's face turned ashen with rage, but he didn't utter a single word in reply. When Fin Lu walked away, I slipped into Orion Chin's ward. At the sight of me, he instinctively tried to hide. There was nowhere to go, so he looked away guiltily and asked, "What are you doing here?" I glared at him, my voice sharp with anger and worry. If I hadn't come, how would I have known you'd been beaten like this? Seeing Orion Chin in person drove home just how badly Fin Lu had hurt him. His left hand was in a cast, his head wrapped in bandages, a bruise blooming around his eye, and his lower lip split and swollen. We need to call the police, I said firmly. Get a formal injury assessment and press charges against him. Willow. Orion Chin hesitated, his voice softening. If I hadn't let him, he never could have laid a finger on me. I frowned, refusing to back down. But you're hurt now. Orion Chin met my gaze, his eyes warm with reassurance. Next time I'll fight back. I let out a scoff, equal parts annoyed and relieved. Next time? You think there's going to be a next time? He fell silent, unable to argue. 13 While Orion Chin was hospitalized, I stayed at the hospital with Piper to take care of him. I'd never expected Piper to take to Orion Chin so quickly. The second I turned my back, she'd climb onto his hospital bed and plop down beside him, begging him to tell her stories. Whenever I pretended to be angry, the two of them would team up and shower me with smiles and sweet words, turning me into a puddle of forgiveness every time. Those days were quiet, warm, and perfect, like a glimpse of the family I'd always dreamed of having. The day Orion Chin was discharged, his official injury assessment report came through too. He handed me the security camera footage of the attack and the assessment report, telling me to use them to fight Fin Lu for full custody of Piper. But no one could have predicted what happened next. Before I could file the evidence in court, Fin Lu sent someone over with the signed divorce agreement. This version was different from the original. It included detailed clauses about child custody and child support. The amount section was left blank with a note saying I could fill in any number I wanted. And at the very bottom of the page, Fin Lu had already signed his name. I didn't ask why he'd suddenly changed his mind. All I cared about was that he was finally willing to let me go. The 1-month mandatory cooling-off period passed in the blink of an eye. On the day we were scheduled to finalize the divorce, I saw Fin Lu at the Civil Affairs Bureau. He was dressed impeccably in a black suit, just like he'd been on our wedding day. When he saw me arrive with Orion Chin and Piper, he froze for a moment. Then his gaze softened as it landed on our daughter. Piper waved at him cheerfully, her voice bright with excitement. Daddy. Dr. Chin said I'll be able to leave the hospital in 2 days. During the cooling-off period, Piper had undergone her surgery, and Orion Chin had been the one to perform it. The operation had been a complete success and Piper was recovering beautifully. Fin Lu had only visited her once on the day of her surgery and never came back again. Fin Lu reached out as if to hug Piper, but hesitated halfway and pulled his hand back. Noticing the tension, Orion turned to me and said gently, "I'll take Piper for a walk around the garden. Come find us when you're done." "Okay," I replied, giving him a grateful smile. I'd been worried the divorce proceedings would be a hassle, but everything went surprisingly smoothly. The moment I held the official divorce certificate in my hand, a weight I'd carried for years lifted off my shoulders, leaving me light and free. Walking out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, I saw Orion holding Piper in his arms, the two of them picking up fallen leaves on the lawn. I was about to walk over to them when Fin called my name from behind. "Aren't you going to say anything?" he asked, his voice quieter than I'd ever heard it. I paused, then turned to him and said with a smile, "Congratulations on your divorce." He pressed his lips together, his eyes dark with regret. "Willow Shin, if I hadn't agreed to the divorce back then, would you have stayed?" I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head, my voice calm but final. "Finlu, do you remember? After Nova Chiao came back, you didn't even bother pretending to love me anymore. I'm not the kind of woman who begs for someone's affection. So I took back my warmth and walked away with dignity. There's a saying, you never knock on a door that's already closed. It's just plain rude." That day Orion drove us far away from the Civil Affairs Bureau. Looking back in the rearview mirror, I could still see Fin standing there, staring after us, his figure small and lonely. Whatever he was thinking, it no longer mattered to me. I held the sleeping Piper tightly in my arms and exchanged a smile with Orion. He glanced at me, a playful glint in his eyes, and said with quiet pride, "I always knew the best way to win a wife's heart was to chase her myself." Epilogue: the day Fin realized he didn't love Nova Chiao was the same day Orion was discharged from the hospital. He'd driven to the hospital on an impulse, only to be stopped by Nova Chiao in the parking lot. She glared at him, her voice sharp with accusation. "You've been coming to this hospital every day. Don't tell me you're just now realizing you can't let Willow Shin go?" For weeks, Nova Chiao had been dropping hints about their wedding, but Fin had brushed her off every single time. She'd followed him for half a month, watching as he lingered outside Orion's ward like a ghost, spying on Willow, Orion, and Piper. Watching the three of them interact with such warmth and ease, like they were the perfect family. Watching how much happier Piper was with Orion than she'd ever been with him. At first, Nova Chiao had thought seeing that would finally make Fin give up on Willow. But instead he kept coming back every day without fail. Just watching. Doing nothing. She couldn't take it anymore. She'd planned to confront him once and for all. But she'd never expected him to admit it outright. "You know I'm still married to Willow, right?" he said flatly. "I'm not going to divorce her." Nova Chiao stared at him in disbelief. "What are you saying? You want to break up with me?" "Yes." "How dare you?" she shrieked, her eyes blazing with rage. "After all these years I've spent waiting for you, what was it all for?" After a long, tense silence he finally spoke, his voice cold and distant. "I'm sorry." Seeing how resolute he was, Nova Chiao's anger melted into desperation and she softened her tone. "It's okay, Fin. We can work this out. Just divorce Willow, she wants the child anyway, so give Piper to her. Then we can have a baby of our own." He cut her off before she could finish, his voice icy with contempt. "I'm never going to marry you." Nova Chiao froze, her face draining of color. "Why?" Fin let out a bitter laugh, his eyes cold with disgust. "Do you really think I didn't see what you did? Ignoring Piper at home was bad enough, but feeding her mangoes? You knew she was allergic. Nova Chiao, if you keep pestering me, I won't hesitate to go to the police and charge you with attempted murder." The threat hung in the air, heavy and final. Nova Chiao felt her world crumble around her. "So you knew all along," she whispered, her voice trembling with shock and despair. "Then why didn't you expose me?" "That's none of your business." Across the parking lot, Orion and Willow Shin got into their car and drove away. Fin didn't even get a chance to say goodbye. He turned to leave, only to be blocked by Nova Chiao one last time. "Fin, you're a coward," she screamed, her voice cracking with rage and heartbreak. "You've always been a coward. If you'd had the guts to stand up to your family back then, you would have married me instead of her. But you didn't. And 2 years ago, if you'd just been honest with yourself about how you felt about Willow, you wouldn't have lost her. But you were too much of a coward to admit it. Even now, what's the point of clinging to that marriage certificate? Her heart has long since stopped belonging to you. You're nothing but a pathetic fool. That night Fin Lu drank until he passed out. When he sobered up the next morning he finally made up his mind to let her go. After Orion Chin and Willow Shen's wedding, the three of them moved away from the city, never to return. As for Fin Lu, he never married again. Years later his best friend tried to console him, clapping him on the shoulder. Come on, Fin. She's married with a family now. It's time to let go. The man's eyes turned red, a wave of pain crashing over him so intense he could barely breathe. How? He whispered, his voice breaking. How do I let go of her? He'd thought their 2 years of marriage had been nothing but an act, a transaction for the sake of their families. But somewhere along the way her smile, her laugh, her quiet strength, they'd all seeped into his bones, becoming a part of him he could never shake off. Every night he'd dream of her. Dream of the look of utter despair in her eyes the day he'd chosen Nova Chow over her. And every time he woke up the pain would hit him all over again. Over and over and over.